It's not. That's better. It's working now. Okay. Okay, welcome to the decision session for Executive Member for Transport on 22nd of June 2021. I have also for the first item, Councillor Widdowson is joining me when we get to that point. That's, sorry, for item 4, should I say correctly, on the agenda, relating to the e-scooter trial. So in terms of taking the order, as published, first item is declarations of interest. I have none. No? Okay, thank you. Second item is the minutes of the meeting of the 11th of May. I'm happy to approve those with a couple of minor corrections. In paragraph 82, it should read franchise rather than refranchise. And in paragraph 84, it should read Local Transport Plan 3, which had a response from 14% of households. It reached all of the households, hopefully, but there was a response from 14% of households. With those two corrections, I'm happy to approve those minutes. The next item I have is public participation, and we have a number of speakers registered. We have one in person and a number of people who are on the phone. So we're going to, in order to make things as smooth as possible, we're going to take the in-person speaker first, which is Rose Drew. So do you want to join us and come and give us your 3 minutes? And if it's easier, apparently you're allowed to take your mask off while you're talking. It's up to you.
I loathe them. I sometimes look for you, so masks really make it hard for me.
Can you also press the Wi-Fi looking button on the microphone, please?
And microphone, okay.
Yeah, so it should be green, and that means everyone can hear.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak here. My name is Rose Drew. Age, illness, or injury, we all become disabled eventually. Disability is not convenient. It is not predictable. This is what authoritarian leaders like Boris Johnson and perhaps yourselves fail to comprehend, and why we need physically disabled people on the council. If I could sequester my disability into a few hours conveniently into the afternoon, I would not be disabled. To qualify for PIP, you have to be able to walk less than 20 meters, even with a cane. The city center is the largest pedestrianized space in England already. Many shops are not open at 9. Tullivers and Brown's opens at 9:30. During the first easing after lockdown, Boys didn't open until 10 a.m. The traffic in New York increases astronomically by 5 p.m. How can one get into the city center after 5:30 for stores that close at 5:30, as 90% of them do, or even from 6 p.m. when Waterstones closes? This restrictive, ableist, and elitist law is only to support those who can afford to eat out or are only interested in going into a pub and using a taxi. And what if one suddenly realizes you need to go into the shops after 10:30 to mail a letter, let's say? They're forced to wait 23 hours. What if they need 2 stores that close at 6 p.m.? The cripple must choose. Postal services at W.H. Smith's, herbal support at Holland and Barrett, something from Waterstones. Being disabled at the very least is a part-time job. Getting up, dressing, doing other morning activities takes longer. Whereas most, and I think all counselors, can just walk up the stairs or go into the kitchen or pop down into another room to fetch something, activity requires time, effort, and planning if one has limited mobility or if one deals with a debilitating fatigue disorder. The removal of the ability of blue badge holders to access the city center has created a segregated, privileged, ableist space. Segregation creates prejudice in a time when Benefit Streets TV shows fan hatred of the disabled. Also, the reason for blue badges to even exist is to enable disabled motorists or their occupants to get as near to their destination as possible in as short a time as possible. None of this 2-hour taxi stuff. No council members making this decision deal with overt physical impairment yet. We all end up enfeebled by age at the very least, unless we drop dead at 35. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your contribution, which we'll consider when we come to that item. The next.
No, and I have Ehlers-Danlos, so my joints don't work very well. And so trying to fart around with this thing, there's one leaking through the side. Yeah, from the side, you might need to repair that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next speaker I have on the phone relating to item 7 is Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Councillor de Gorn. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Marvellous. Are you happy for me to start?
Yes, sorry, start.
No, thank you. Thank you, Councillor de Gorn, and I'd like to thank you and all those officers who have been involved in the preparation of this report, and those who, for a number of years, have been involved in getting this project to the stage it has now reached. For believe me, Chair, it has taken many years of effort from residents lobbying and councillors arguing to finally persuade the University of York that this was an issue that was not going to go away, and to persuade highways officers that something tangible could be achieved if we all persevered. It's with my gratitude, therefore, that the new Vice-Chancellor, after meeting with me, accepted that the university needed to meet its obligations to its neighbours and unblocked the process. I'm so pleased that the majority of those residents who responded to the consultation were in support. I also understand that those objecting from streets running off Thief Lane, which do not have off-street parking, have more concerns, but the option remains open for them to join at a later date, should there be issues once the wider scheme is implemented. However, Chair, I feel the recommendation as regards Newland Park Drive from numbers 25 upwards to be a mistake. You will have received details of a petition, very quickly drafted and collected after these papers were published last week, to show a much wider level of support than initially identified in the papers. I can understand that those properties with multiple cars and landlords of the many HMOs may have concerns that other than the first permit paid for by the university, they will be liable for additional payments. However, I would strongly argue, Chair, that it is sometimes inconsiderate parking of those residents who have ample off-street parking, yet choose to park on the road and the verges, as well as the non-residents, that have exacerbated the parking problems and blockages. Residents of Newland Park Drive have been lobbying me and my colleagues for years about the parking problems on the street. Ambulances, waste collection wagons, and even the odd fire engine have found the parking on both sides of the road to have made it almost impossible to get through. Chair, if you exclude most of Newland Park Drive from the scheme due to the objections of, I suspect, predominantly landlords, you will create a nightmare scenario, far worse than currently exists, where cars who would have overflow parked out elsewhere will gravitate to the free parking on Newland Park Drive. Councillor de Gorn, please do the right thing by these residents. Pay heed to the written submissions, the public participants and the petition, and accept the whole of Newland Park Drive into the wider residents parking scheme. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for that contribution. The next item, the next speaker I have is Lisa Ballantyne to speak on Balmoral Terrace residents parking. Is Lisa there? She's not, okay. I've got a note that she was in support of it. I think she was only wanting to speak if there were certain issues to be clarified. Speaker after that is Cheryl Coop, who is wanting to speak on the Newland Park Drive issue and the residents parking university area. Is Cheryl there? Okay. Can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Cheryl, if you can please press *6 on your phone, that will unmute you.
We can't hear. If she manages to come through, we'll come back to her. So the next speaker I've got in relation to item 6, I think, is Councillor Pete Kilbane.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Oh, good. We finally got one. Okay, great. Should I make a start?
You can start. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Just firstly on item 5, Footstreets. I know Councillor Melly's going to speak to this on our behalf, but I have to ask what the logic is of making this decision now while the My City Centre consultation is underway. It doesn't seem to be very joined up thinking to me. In terms of item 6, the South Bank Res Park, we welcome the changes that are before you today. We'd like to thank the officers for the work that they've done on it. I know that a lot of the streets we didn't get more than a 50% response from, so we're unable to make a decision. I'm sure that the COVID restrictions have something to do with that. But what I would like to highlight is the fact that I think what we'll see over the next couple of years is Res Park creep as commuters, second car owners, people who don't want to pay for the Res Park fees, start to park in the un-Res Park areas. And I think at some point as a city, we need to consult with residents to look at a more universal system that could potentially be cheaper because obviously this is supposed to be a service rather than a money-making activity. I just also want to touch on item 10, the Transport Capital Programme, and we note the carryover or delay to the Tranche 2 Active Travel Fund for the cycling corridors in and out of the city. Just given that we warned against delays in the emergency travel programme 6 months ago, we've no confidence that the exec member for transport will be able to deliver these schemes. In fact, the delays have been so significant, they've caused campaigners to take to the streets in protest against them. In fact, the York Green Party joined in the protest, which suggests that they too have little confidence in the transport exec's ability to deliver the scheme. And these doubts are well founded because it's now nearly a month since Terry Avenue was closed, and we still have no safe alternative route for cyclists into town. Clearly, active travel is not a priority for this administration, and sadly, it is with some confidence that I firmly predict cycling rates will have already declined in the city and will continue to decline because of the inability of this supposedly green transport department to deliver active travel infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. The next speaker I have is Martin Emerson, who wants to speak on the residents parking around the university. Are you there, Martin? You may need to press *6 to unmute, partner.
University, are you there?
Yes?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Okay, do you want to start?
Hello, can you hear me okay? Because it's been a bit patchy here. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. What was that?
Sorry, Martin, you just remuted yourself. Can you press *6 yet again, just so we can hear you?
You can hear me now, can you?
We can, yes. Yes. Do you want to say what you want to say?
It's just been very patchy. It's got cutting in on and off.
We can hear you.
Sorry, Martin, you just remuted yourself. Sorry, Martin, you've just remuted yourself. If you do unmute, we can hear you in the room.
You can hear me now, can you?
Yes.
It
Just start.
cutting
Yes.
in and out all the time. There's a signal here, so I'm having difficulty hearing and knowing what's happening. So,
Okay.
you can hear me, can you?
Yeah.
Right. Right. I just trust you can hear me. Okay. Yeah, we were. Some of us were concerned about the consultation in the first place because, normally we would have had a petition, and a few years ago we were considering a petition until we saw what was going to negotiations with the university. So we didn't do a petition then. When it came to the actual event, we couldn't do a petition because of COVID. A lot of people were confused about the thing, with no stamped addressed envelopes or anything. People just didn't know how to reply, and we only had very short notice because we had a date of the 5th of March to get replies in by, and some of us didn't receive it until the 22nd of February. So it worked out as about 9 days or so, allowing for postage. So, and we had 22 votes for, 13 against. That was 63% of residents that did send in the reply voted for. We petitioned. We've got we canvassed 57 out of 95 occupied houses in the zone. There are 3 empty at the moment, and of those, 7 didn't want to sign. 49 signed for, and only 1 against. So there's very, and the students, in fact, in the HMOs were very, very enthusiastic for us to have residents parking in the area. There are 26 HMOs. We canvassed 19 of them. Only 1 didn't sign. All of the rest, the remaining 18, signed for it. So very, very enthusiastic. But we are, we've had a lot of problems over the years. We were the people from this area are the very people who started the campaign for residents parking in the area. So it would seem odd if we weren't included. Even during lockdown, where there's been fewer people parking there, the road has been impassable on many occasions. And just in the last week, we've seen problems. I've had carers having to park on the next street because they couldn't find somewhere to park here. That's only happened twice since lockdown, but it's a regular occurrence during normal times. So should for any reason at all, this area of Newland Park Drive be excluded from residents parking, all those that would have been parking in the areas that are recommended for residents parking will now come and park here. And there's a risk that those that are in HMOs that are in the residents parking area will take advantage of the closeness of us being out of it as an opportunity to, rather than buy an extra permit if they've got multiple cars to park here. So, and since the area has been a through route for the rest of the area, since the blockade went on Thief Lane in the 1970s, many people on Thief Lane and the other streets come through Newland Park Drive to get to other places. If they want to go down to Hassington Road direction, it depends on where they live in the area, but it's often used as a through route. It would inconvenience, increasing parking on Newland Park Drive and inconvenience the whole area, not just Newland Park Drive. And there are many houses that don't have, though down the bottom end in the higher numbers, most of the HMOs have adequate off-road parking. The ones nearer to Newland Park Close do not have off-road parking or only have 1 space. And some of those houses, just coming up to a lockdown, 2 of those houses without adequate off-road parking had 6 cars at each house across the road from each other. It jams up the whole road. And, it would, although being res park doesn't stop that, it will discourage it because of the cost of having to buy extra permits. And as to the landlords, we believe most of the objections came from the landlords, but I know at least one landlord, a friend of ours, is for residence parking, and for the landlords, I think they've objected as a matter of course, but it would actually be detrimental to the landlords if this becomes such an area so blocked up with cars. It will discourage people wanting to live here if it's so bad for parking. And as they're so close to the university, in any case, it's one of the most popular areas for student housing. So they're unlikely to be a threat to the landlords, even if, the only inconvenience to the landlords is when they need to access the properties themselves, what they have to do, which is one of the questions that have been asked by landlords.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution. I think given fairly generous allocation of time for that. So thank you very much, Martin. We did manage to hear that quite clearly.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. So the next speaker I've got is Anne Norton, who is representing York Disability Rights Forum.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Would like to start your contribution?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of York Disability Rights Forum regarding the Footstreets item on the agenda. We are at a point in the pandemic when most people are enjoying getting back into the city we love. However, the proposed Foot Street extension remains on the minds of many disabled people, whether residents or regular visitors. We acknowledge the proposed improvements to the blue badge parking provision on the outskirts of the pedestrianised area and have commented on them. However, whilst these spaces offer some blue badge holders hope of getting into the city centre, they are not suitable for all and do not replace what has been lost in terms of location and proximity to destinations. The temporary measures to extend the foot streets were put in place to allow social distancing and to allow businesses to continue to operate during the pandemic. However, many of our members feel that the process disregards the rights of disabled people to access the city centre. We continue to hear weekly from people affected by the changes, the devastating impact it has on their day-to-day lives, their quality of living, feeling of belonging and social lives has been horrific to hear about. The people who have contacted us represent all ages, from young people wanting to meet their friends to older people wanting to access support or get to the central post office and other amenities they've always accessed. Whilst we do our best to represent these voices through consultations, this inevitably creates a degree of emotional distancing for the council, as you do not get to hear directly the heartfelt stories we hear. We strongly encourage the council to follow up on previously suggested mapping exercises to establish which areas of the city are currently not accessible for anyone unable to get more than 50 metres from their vehicle. It is also essential to consider how the current changing places and other accessible toilets are located in relation to the parking offer proposed today. When discussing the survey results from September, nuance is required. Whilst many disabled people can acknowledge the increased sense of safety that comes with reduced traffic in the city centre, access and safety are different issues, and the way the results are discussed does not allow for this distinction to be present. Thus, it will be the case that at least some of those disabled people acknowledging the increase in safety are not blue badge holders and therefore not affected by the removal of such parking. Such differentiation is important. The survey responses, as accessed via York Open Data, actually showed that 78% of people who are blue badge holders disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement, "There is parking close enough to allow me to access the city centre." We are concerned the way data and statistics are being used to position certain groups of disabled people in opposition to each other. We welcome the move towards improved information about blue badge parking and the ongoing engagement with the disabled community, and hope the Council continues to listen and engage with York Disability Rights Forum, other disabled-led organisations and the disabled people who want to live, work and shop in the city they call home. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I believe Anne Baldwin is not, and is Councillor Melly? Yeah, so I've got Councillor Melly, I think, as the last speaker this morning. Can you hear us, Councillor Melly?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Do you want to start when you're ready?
Great, yeah, thank you. I'm also speaking on the agenda item about blue badge access to the Footstreets. I'd like to start by thanking officers for all the hard work that's gone into much better consultation with people negatively impacted by having vehicle access to the city centre restricted. I'm not surprised that the further consultation into the Footstreets extensions has shown such wide support from residents and businesses. With 92% of businesses who responded saying they would like the extension to continue. The city centre environment for those who can access it has been enhanced. The increased pedestrianisation has facilitated other initiatives to make our public spaces safer, cleaner and more welcoming. The reduced traffic to make more space for pedestrians has also made more space for pavement cafes. These have had a whole load of disability and accessibility implications which need more work, but they've also been instrumental in keeping local businesses afloat and creating COVID-safe ways for people to enjoy food and drink, and wouldn't have been possible if there had been vehicle movements. These sorts of schemes need to continue, and I hope there will be long-term positive benefits for health and well-being being of our residents, local businesses and the environment. But the Footstreet scheme so far has led to people who already have the least access to our city centre and outdoor spaces being even further marginalised. And the report for today's meeting focuses on mitigating the disadvantages caused by the Footstreet extensions. But you need to go so much further to really make the whole city accessible. The city centre wasn't accessible before the Footstreet area was increased. So simply mitigating against the disadvantages of extending the Footstreets won't make the city centre accessible. The Footstreets have created a less inaccessible city centre for a large range of disabled people, including many people with visual impairments, hearing impairments, limited mobility, that sort of thing. But although 61% of disabled respondents to the council's recent engagement exercises agreed or strongly agreed with extending the Footstreets, that still leaves a lot of people whose lives will be negatively impacted by today's decision. So if you do make the decision to begin the statutory process to permanently remove the blue badge exemption, you urgently need to do so much more to make the city centre accessible to everyone. During the current crisis and when we build back better, we need to keep in mind the council's slogan of self-welcoming, safe, welcoming, considerate. It's what we want for our city and for every resident. The city centre and the whole city needs to be safe, welcoming and considerate for everyone, not just the majority. And so that people can enjoy getting out and about and spending time in our beautiful city and spending money in our local businesses.
Thank you very much for your contribution. That concludes the... Oh, right, okay. We still have one more to come. I think, is that Cheryl Poop? Yeah. Can you hear us, Cheryl?
Cheryl, it is *6 to unmute, so if you can just press that on your handset, we'll be able to hear you. Also, just double check that you're not pressing the hash symbol instead of star.
No, okay, right. Well, we have had some speakers on that item already, so I think we'd better move on. So on that point, then I'll move on to the item 4 in the agenda, which is the review of e-scooter and e-bike trial and considering options for extension of a trial. And I believe that Councillor Bridderson will be party to this decision. Is that my understanding of how we're doing this? Okay. So do you want to introduce this item then?
Yes. Oh, that's it. Yep. Thank you, Chair. So both yourself and Councillor Widdowson approved the original trial, hence why you're both here today. At the last meeting, you extended the area within the city boundary that the e-scooters and e-bikes are being trialled. Under this trial, it's one of the DFT approved trials of e-scooter hire schemes. and the DFT have recently extended the period that the trials can take place. And this report seeks to extend the trial to match the DFT extension and extend the contract with the city's chosen provider until the end of March 22. So you're presented with three options: either continue until 31st of March 22, i.e. the DFT trial end, with the current provider and allowing the scheme to grow in terms of the number of e-scooters through the sort of decision sessions that we've done in terms of extensions. And continue until 31st, the other alternative, sorry, is to continue until 31st of March 22, as currently, with no expansion on the number of e-scooters. And the third option is to end the trial. Officers are recommending option one, which is to continue until 31st of March 22 with the current provider and allowing the scheme to extend from, I think it's 700 to 1,000.
So I was trying to help with the technology. Do you have any questions you want to ask?
I don't have any
Or
questions.
points?
I do have a couple of comments,
Okay.
so it depends how you want. Do you want me to just make the comments then? Okay. I am fully supportive of option one. I think expanding an extremely successful pilot is such a good idea, and I'm delighted that Councillor de Gaulle has discussed this and come up with a plan for it. We've got over 9,000 riders registered using the scooters and the bikes. We have nearly 2,000 weekly riders. There's hundreds of scooters and over 40 bikes. And given the cynicism, the queries, or whatever we had at the very start of this trial, to see it be so successful, watching people giggle and smile as it goes past them, and the average age of the riders are in their 30s. It is fabulous. So I'm absolutely fully supportive of this and delighted with the safety precautions that Councillor de Gaulle has got in place, whether that's to do with COVID, whether that's to do with safety in terms of helmets, geofencing. Fabulous trial, and long may it continue. Let's see how successful we can make it. So many thanks, Councillor de Gaulle.
Well, I'd like to also very much welcome the contribution that has been made to sustainable travel in the city by this trial. I think I'm sure officers will confirm that when it was first mooted, I was quite sceptical about it in terms of the sort of public reaction that there might be, but I think that the selection process that we went through was quite rigorous. The company that we selected out of those that expressed an interest have gone that extra mile. You know, everything from, as you said, the COVID safety, the innovation, the fact that they are actually working on, have had a number of meetings with disability groups to make sure that their machines are designed to be as favourable as possible. The fact that we've got the geofencing and we have regular updates with the company and with officers to ensure that if there are issues that arise, that we're able to address those quite quickly. And you know, I accept in the report does acknowledge it's not hiding any of the sort of challenges that we face. But having said that, we're working together to deliver more sustainable transport in the city. And I've from talking to people, I know it's sort of anecdotal, but certainly a lot of people are now looking at them as an alternative to a short car trip, which is obviously what we want. It's not just a fun ride, which you know, in itself is something which might convince people that cycling or scooting is an attractive option for them. And I think also for me, the benefit of this option, which has been added into the mix, is that people can try something out if they, you know, at the moment the private e-scooters are not legal, but I'm sure in the fullness of time once they are, they will have had an induction in terms of safety, using a helmet, all those sorts of things that the company provide us with. So I'm very much in support of extending this with the current provider, who has worked well with the City of York and has gone that extra mile or kilometre, whichever you prefer, in terms of providing a safe and attractive option for residents and visitors. As increasingly it will be visitors as well, I'm sure. So I'm happy to approve that. That which is recommended is option 1. Yep. Thank you. So I'll move on to, thank you very much for your attendance. So yes, you can, for the sake of the minutes, you can note that we've both approved that. So I'll move on now to agenda item 5, which is the statutory process for the Footstreets and Blue Badge. Do you want to next?
Yes, so
users?
As you will remember, in November at Executive, they approved making the temporary Footstreets permanent as a principle, but they delegated to you as the executive member for transport implementation of mitigations for Blue Badge holders whose access is removed, and the process of formal consultation through the traffic regulation order, which was delegated to you as well. And the reason at Executive was to remove the vehicle and pedestrian conflict from these high footfall streets, and also to allow the city centre security measures for hostile mitigation to be considered as a single phase. So before you today is the report that follows on from that, and this process has taken longer than anticipated, as additional mitigations to those outlined in the executive report have been brought forward and consulted upon. The report's clear that Castlegate will be dealt with separately and isn't the subject of this report. As the report details, we've sought to engage all those negatively impacted by the Footstreets change. We've had over 1,900 responses. We've had detailed workshops with Blue Badge holders and groups with 421 people, including the advocacy groups that represent thousands of people. Extension of the Footstreets was supported by 67% of respondents overall, and of those identifying as having a disability, 61% were in favour. In a follow-up survey targeting disabled residents, twice as many agreed rather than disagreed that extra room increased their safety, with more agreeing that fewer vehicles increases their safety. And the temporary measures have enabled approximately 100 street cafe licences, which have been critical to the city's reopening. However, it's not a simple, process in terms of mitigation. So in addition to the process before you, you'll be aware the council are undertaking a strategic review of city centre access and parking, which is in addition to the mitigations, and will further consider the needs of different communities. As you've heard today from speakers, those needs are varied and we need to tailor, and that's part of that ongoing conversation we're having. The recommendations are that we start the formal process now of permanently removing the exemption for Blue Badge holders from those streets listed in the report by advertising the TRO. And secondly, to approve the advertising of a TRO to create new Blue Badge parking areas, on the outskirts of the pedestrianised area. If you've got any questions on the detail behind those mitigations, I'm sure Aaron can take you through that.
Thank you. As you've said, quite clearly this is an important decision in terms of taking forward the consultation work that has already been undertaken. This report makes clear that changes since COVID, the temporary measures have been widely supported, including, as you said, a majority of those who have a disability, or accept the point that was made by one of the speakers. We do recognise that disability is very wide-ranging. The different people have different, it has different impacts on them. And so, for example, as is referred to in the report, some of the blind and partially sighted have actually felt that they felt a lot safer since the changes have been made, whereas obviously those who have limited mobility and can't, as we heard from the speaker, can't walk very far unaided, have been disadvantaged by it. So as with all things that the council has to do, we're trying to balance and mitigate the imbalance, the differing needs of individuals and mitigate them as far as we can. So this report is focused on the mitigation of providing additional blue badge bays around the edge of the restricted area. And the context of wider impacts is outlined in it as well. The changes that we are getting views from all users are also going to be considered through things like the My City Centre consultation. So just one or two people have raised concerns about the overlap between the two. And correct me if I've got this wrong, but the process that we're looking at here is the formal consultation on the blue badge changes and the additional bays, whereas the wider issues around My City Centre are still open for a further consultation in a wider sense.
Absolutely, and I think there's a couple of things at play that will continue the conversation. So I talked that strategic review of city centre access and parking, which is a piece of work that is live at the moment. That I'm sure will come out with recommendations about what we can do to improve the city centre, as will the wider piece of work on the city centre, the My City Centre piece of work, which you've alluded to. As you will know only too well from these decision sessions, traffic regulation orders aren't static. They change all the time as we respond to the way the city changes. So, you know, whilst we have gone through several sessions of coming up with mitigations, both mitigations when there were temporary restrictions, the additional mitigations that are before you today in terms of mitigations if it's made permanent, that process will continue. We're not drawing a line under it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, also I would draw attention to on page 60 in the report, there's a summary of some of the wider impacts. And I note on paragraph 130, we'll continue to look at feasibility and viability of other measures in addition to the additional parking, which has been is the sort of main focus of this report. Which could contribute to improving access for these groups, including options such as a shuttle service for those with limited mobility, delivery hubs, operation of shop mobility, priority car parking, and so on. So those are all further mitigations which I'd be very keen for us to pursue alongside this sort of more formal process. In terms of the sort of specifics, the locations which have been outlined in quite a lot of detail. There is one which, well, there's a couple which are of particular concern in terms of representations that have been made, and that's St Andrew's Gate and St Andrew's Place, and it is slightly confusing for those who don't know the geography of the area, but St Andrew Gate links into St Andrew's Place, but there's a set of bollards along it, which mean there's two separate access routes to those parking bays. Am I right in understand that, how I understand that? Yeah. So the St Andrew Gate, remind me which, I'm not sure which annex that is, but
Annex D. D for Delta.
D, okay. Yeah, on St Andrew's Gate, the one which had saw concerns about there was there's one bay which is proposed to be quite close to the point closure with the bollards. And I think one of the views was that if somebody was parked in that bay, firstly, they're going to have potentially having cyclists going past quite close to them. And secondly, if somebody else parks on W lines behind them, then they can't get out. Is what I mean.
Yeah.
So I have some concerns about that particular. So I don't know if
Thinking the recommendation for that would be we'd have to reassess the location of the bollards as well as the point closure, whether that would change the infrastructure on street.
Okay.
So then it'd move the cycle access to one side,
right,
away from the vehicles.
So that one, the recommendation, just to clarify, so the recommendation is that would be subject to a review of the location of the closure
not the point closure, but the actual location of the bollards that are subject to the point closure.
Yeah, yes, I get you. Yeah, I mean, obviously the point closure would still be between those Bartle Garth and the other junction, but it's just physically how much space
widen the bollards in a different location.
Okay. I mean, obviously at this stage we are proposing to advertise these for any objections, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the ones that were taken forward, yeah.
So there's another phase before they'd actually be put in place in terms of
any
objections that might be from
at the statutory consultation point. Anyone that raises comments on that would be investigated further before bringing back for the decision session.
I mean, okay, so on that basis, I'm happy to approve that one. However, I do want to, given the representations I've read, to remove the proposal for St Andrew's Place. Was it St Andrew Place, which is, I mean, quite a lot of the comments in here point out that the residents there have a condition on their lease that they're supposed to park their cars in the garages.
Yeah.
Which then creates, I mean, obviously it was created with no footway, so there's no pavement on the street. It's sort of block paved. It, to all intents and purposes, looks like a private street, even if it is actually technically adopted. And anybody with only having two bays in that location, then there is a risk that you attract people to come to that space, find it's full, and then decide, well, we're going to have to turn around, go back out again, which, as I understand it, would be adding to the general delivery traffic and various other things which are used in that area already. So I'd like those two removed, but from the list that are advertised, but the rest of them I'm quite happy to approve.
Just to clarify then, so in terms of the recommendations,
so it's obviously the recommendations, some of them are not to go ahead, aren't they? So,
so you're approving the formal traffic regulation order for the Footstreets to make that permanent, and in terms of the mitigations, you're saying that last recommendation, you're happy to advertise all of them except the one for St Andrew.
All the ones that you're recommending.
Always well for recommendation.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
And one other point I wanted to raise was in relation in page 67, there's the independent review of York City Centre disabled access offer. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was this reported? This was reported in November to the executive.
Yeah.
When the
yes, that was a good
taken, wasn't it? Okay. What concerns me is that there are a number of recommendations in here which have not been subject to any sort of consultation beyond the fact that it was in the paper that went to the executive. And I know there are some things in here which blue badge holders may or may not agree to, but I think if we are going to do consultation on further mitigation, there's a number of things that should be looked at in these recommendations, just so that, obviously we took the decision to commission these people to get their advice. We should see what residents and stakeholders have to think about any of these proposals.
And I think we can weave that into that strategic review of access and parking in my city centre.
And I do know one of them was about appointing an access officer. I think that would need to be part of a budget consultation, obviously there's financial implications
Absolutely.
of something like that, but nevertheless that could be raised through the budget process for next year, if that seemed to be something that people felt we wanted to support. So with those amendments, I'm happy to approve this going forward for consultation. And just to stress, as you said, this is the formal consultation process. The decision, I believe, will be September. Is that sort of where we're aiming for a decision on?
That's
Yeah.
what we're hopefully aiming for, but obviously it will depend on the scale of consultation that comes back, on how quickly we can consolidate that information to come back to a decision.
And obviously that ties into some decisions which need to be made in terms of timescales about the hostile vehicle measures, and those sorts of financial decisions which we need to make sure that we're making most cost-effective use of taxpayers' money in those measures.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I'm happy to approve those recommendations as amended. So which takes me to item 6, which is the South Bank residence parking.
I'll hand over to Darren on this. This is the next stage in making the TRO following advertising.
So yeah, it's just to report back on the progress of advertising the draft order. The order which the executive member considered in August 2020, which would implement residence parking in the South Bank area. The executive member was asked to confirm the decision to met the traffic regulation order to introduce Res Park scheme, and also he's asked to agree to take forward and stick with the parking on our road as it is, as made, and additionally the experimental traffic order for the Res Park to allow parking on the footpath with permits.
Right.
Have you got any questions on the actual
well, I appreciate the officers have done a very comprehensive piece of work on this. It is quite complex, and taking into account various factors, including a GP surgery in the area and the situation with Bishopthorpe Road, where there currently is a custom and practice of pavement parking, which I believe the approach that you're recommending is in paragraph 40, agreement for an experimental order to include the section of Bishopthorpe Road between Balmoral Terrace and Camplesham Road, and Balmoral Terrace between Bishopthorpe Road and Montague Street in a Res Park area, but with section which allows for up to an hour, which is relation to the GP surgery, isn't it? And the intention there is to monitor for 6 months to assess the sort of level of parking. I think it's an area I'm familiar with, and the issue is that if people park on both sides of the road and the buses can't get through, it's quite a busy major road. But if it becomes a residence parking area and the level of parking reduces, we don't really want to make that a permanent arrangement if there isn't the need for residents in the immediate area. So by making an experimental order on both sides, that allows time for usage to adjust, because I think the suspicion is that at least some of the parking along there is people who have been vehicles have been displaced from the nearby residence parking at the moment. Okay. So once that's included within a residence parking area, potentially, it may be that we can review that and actually remove parking from one side or reduce it to a short stay for the GP surgery or whatever, but we can do that as a second stage. So okay. I'm happy with that proposal to address that issue. I think, does that cover the question that was around Balmoral Terrace as well? Yes, I think that was on the initial early section of the Balmoral Terrace is included in that area, isn't it? So we can reflect on how that works in practice. And then there's also a section which has got on here, page Annex B2 has got no waiting on different sides of a road at different times of day to allow for some short stay parking, but prevent commuter parking in the area. So with that proviso, I'm happy to approve the general order. And as you said, the other point was about Albemarle Road. There have been discussions as to whether it switched to the other side, but then that would, although it would increase the parking, it would create problems potentially for residents.
Yeah, the residents were in favour of keeping the parking on the side that's the property side.
Keeping it as it is, and obviously, I mean, as with all of these schemes, there will be some of the streets that are at the edge of the area that's being approved, as Councillor Kilbane mentioned. That is it's always an issue that we face, but it is open to residents in surrounding areas. If they find there's displacement parking which becomes a problem, then that comes back to us to look at as a separate item. But we've gone on this, I believe we've gone as far as we can in terms of the expressed views of residents in those streets to include them within the residents parking area. So I think
everything was the cricket club, the inclusion of the cricket club within the zone.
Say that again.
The inclusion of the cricket club, Ovington Cricket Club.
Right. Okay. So just remind me what's the.
It was to include their eligibility within the zone as their clubhouse on that side of the.
So I seem to recall we had a discussion about this, and the hours of operation for this, is it Monday to Friday?
Yes, I think.
Yeah. So just remind me what's proposed in relation to the cricket club.
They weren't included in the original proposal, so they're asking to be included.
Right. Well, I'm happy if you're recommending inclusion. Is that for a couple of spaces or something?
It'd be for them to apply for one. I think it's for one permit. So
one permit.
The club steward or club manager, whoever.
Right. I see. So it's like the staff who might need to be there during the daytime. I understand. Yeah. Yes, I'm happy with that arrangement, and obviously it could be subject to review if there's if further issues arise. But we're approving these orders to go forward for implementation now, which I'm sure that the residents who initially petitioned for this will be pleased to see this moving forward. Okay, thank you. I'll move on to the next item, which is another residence parking area. Item 7, the University Badger Hill residence parking.
And this is at the same stage of the process in terms of.
Yeah, so we've been out on the draft order, and this is requesting recommendation for the statutory consultation, the making of the statutory consultation.
So we've done the statutory consultation, yeah. So this is again moving to implementation of it. And this is, I suppose it's worth just explaining to anybody who's watching that this is slightly different in that under the Section 106 agreement with the university for Heslington East, they were required to do monitoring of displacement levels and area displacement parking in surrounding streets. And there's already a residence parking area that covers part of Badger Hill, and this is proposing to extend it further. But am I right in saying that the first permit for residents in these areas will be funded through the
Yeah, that's
university?
paid for by the university through the 106.
Yeah. So it's slightly different in that sense, and in order to try and speed things a little bit, the order's been advertised, and we're now considering the objections, including the one which a lot of speakers have addressed in relation to the second section. So before I go on to that specific point about Newland Park Drive, can I just also check? There's reference in the report to some shops on Yarborough Way. I just wanted to check that it's difficult to make out on these map plans exactly which road we're talking about. I just wanted to check, is there some short stay parking for the shops included within that, the proposal?
It was proposed for, so yeah, that was in the proposal for short stay parking for the shops.
Right, okay. So
I think it was a 2 hour, I think they had a 2 hour limit on the bay.
Right, so there is, within that, there will be a section of road outside the shops that
Yeah,
that customers can shop, who haven't got permits can park at. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we're catering for that. So I suppose the majority of the recommendations I'm happy to approve. The main one, as you will have heard, that is in contention was Newland Park Drive, and it's the section, is it the eastern section, Newland Park Drive, which was in question? Yeah,
east of Newland Park Close.
That's correct. So I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Well, for Newland Park Drive as a whole, we had 29 people in favour and 14 against. Of the properties to the east of Newland.
Is that 14 against?
Yeah, for Newland Park Drive as a whole, for the whole street, east and west of Newland Park Close.
Right.
13 of those objections came from the east side of Newland Park Drive. So it appears that the main factor was, there seems to be some concern that was mainly due to multiple occupancy, but we don't have any data on that to confirm if that's correct or not. Right. Most streets have off-street parking, and then based on the level of objections, the recommendation was to not include that section. But obviously, as we've heard, there is substantial people in favour as well.
Well, as we've heard, one of the speakers has been out, and we did have a petition sent in from residents in that area asking to be included. From my notes from what the public speaker said, he had 49 people who signed saying they wanted to be included. I think there was one who refused to discuss it, and 7 who were against it being included. And I think I did raise this when we first looked at the outcome of the consultation. And my concern has been largely confirmed by the views of the residents that were we to leave that section of Newland Park Drive out, it would in effect become a magnet for not only people who haven't got permits but are working at the university, but potentially also people who live just over around the edge would actually move in there. So, you'd have a perfect storm of non-residents and those residents who got more than one car and didn't want to pay for a permit in adjoining streets. So I am convinced by the views of the ward councillor and the residents that the rest of that road should be included within the area. So that, I think that is one of the options you've included in the report, is to include the whole of Newland Park Drive within the residents' parking area. I do accept that obviously there's terrace streets off Hull Road, which will be outside. And inevitably, whenever you have a residents' parking, there will be some displacement parking around the edge. I think to have that sort of larger area included within it makes sense. I do have some concerns about, speaking since this is border with Fishergate Ward, do have some concerns about Kexby Avenue and Thief Lane, what impacts that might have, but I accept that if there have been objections from that area, then at this stage, given that that is sort of very much unknown what the impact will be on the surrounding streets, and to approve it as you set out, but with the addition of the Newland Park Drive section. Okay, so I'm happy to approve that on that basis. So that takes me then to St Mary's, I think, which is item 8. Page. You're going to say something about this?
Well, I was going to nearly hand over to Tony to take you through the report, really.
Hello, Councillor. Yeah, this report just sets out an update really on the scheme that we're trying to progress at St Mary's and Bootham Junction to provide a controlled crossing for cyclists to sort of build upon the improvements on Scarborough Bridge and enhance the link between the station and the hospital. As part of that process, we needed to make some changes to the parking restrictions on St Mary's, and this report sets those. There was one objection received for the changes, and the recommendation is to overrule that objection in the report. There was no details of the reason for the objection that was put forward. The other element that we've also brought forward is that we've taken the opportunity to review the layout of the junction itself, provision, and the recommendation is to take forward option B, which includes a full width advanced stop line area for cyclists to accommodate the numbers of cyclists we're expecting in the area, but that is subject to a road safety audit on the detailed design.
Right, well, thank you. So my understanding is that the objection is most likely related to the loss of residents' parking space because of the new junction. Is that, or did you say it wasn't actually stated?
There wasn't any detail of, it was just an objection.
Okay.
So we assume it is in relation to that.
Yeah.
But without,
I think that's, it says, as you've put in the report, we've mitigated that as far as possible. It's probably about 2 car spaces reduction, but that is needed to allow for the new signals and being set back from the junction.
That is correct. And the signals need to be set back quite a distance because of the turning movements of large vehicles coming off Bootham into St Mary's, and that's led to the restriction change.
Right. I mean, I suppose it's worth saying that this has been, work's been going on this for a few months now, hasn't it, in terms of the actual design, but we've taken account of a number of considerations, including the sort of impact of signalisation on Penn House and the conservation area.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, and I think there was certainly one version which we were looking at having the advanced stop line closer to the junction, but then that had an impact in terms of the signalling for that.
That's right. I mean, there was, we did check through with the Department for Transport on making adjustment to the signal layout, which was outside sort of standards, but they wouldn't approve that change. So we had to revert to a more standard arrangement.
Right, and I suppose for people who aren't familiar with that junction, there is already a signalised crossing on Bootham, isn't it? And this is going to incorporate the pedestrian crossing into, so it's not actually adding more signals along Bootham, but it's actually converting that into a crossing and facility for cyclists to cross into Bootham Park.
That is correct. It's signalising the junction rather than there is a pedestrian crossing, signalised crossing there at the moment, which is coming to the end of its life and would need to be replaced shortly anyway.
Right, okay. So, right, so I'm certainly very happy to be approving this key part of the route from, as you said, from the station through to the hospital. There is also another element which I think is probably about to start, hopefully fairly soon, the ramp up from St Mary's car park.
Yeah, we're just running through the final detail design of that element. The path along the side of Marygate car park has been widened, so the full route will be complete.
So at the moment, there's a set of steps and a wheel ramp to get your bike up for the last bit of this route, but that will be replaced with a properly designed ramp.
That's right.
Which will access St Mary's as opposed to the other street. So this actually forms potentially the sort of key link of an off-road route, a largely off-road route between the station and the hospital, which hopefully will encourage more cycling or scooting to and from the hospital, and thus also help with our congestion issues around the hospital. So I'm happy to approve that, and I would sort of like to thank officers for the adjustment to the giant design to have a full width advanced cycle box. I think once this becomes established, it will become very popular. We need to accommodate that as far as possible. So I'll then move on to item 9 is vehicle crossings.
The report we've got before you effective adoption of the new policy came before you on So the report before you is the adoption of the policy, and it provides clarity both for officers and for the public on how the council will consider such applications. Throughout the report and the policy, what we've tried to do is consider the impact of crossings, both in terms of vehicles overhanging onto footways, so that we can maintain suitable space on footways for pedestrians, pushchairs, wheelchairs, etc. So the key things it will be is about consistency, about a 6 metre length for all vehicles, although that is reduced to 5.5 metres if there's not a door opening from a garage, etc. And that's to avoid that encroachment onto the footway. And there's some of the sort of small changes in terms of the process around approval. So rather than having a list of contractors, there'll be a sort of approval process for the designs. So you've been asked to approve and formally adopt this policy today.
Well, again, I very much welcome this. I think, well, I certainly hope that this might actually be helpful for officers as well, in terms of if it's available on the council website for reference. It could answer a lot of inquiries that they might otherwise have to deal with if people take the time to read through the policy before they come forward with a design or a request. It would certainly help reduce some of the burden on officers dealing with lots of inquiries from residents who might want to consider crossings. Does also highlight such issues as drainage, gradient, impact on parking on the street trees, the different factors that have to be taken into account. So I very much welcome it, and I'm sure that in fullness of time, if there are further things that need to be added, then we can adapt to it, but at least it will be a good start in having an adopted policy to refer to. So I'm happy to approve that. And also note, there were some concerns raised. I think the only representations that you had was about the impact on people with disabilities and cycle crossings. You know, obviously there's a balance to be made, but that's something else to take into account. You know, I think we are fortunate in York in many senses that we're not exactly lots of gradients, steep gradients to worry about, but nevertheless there will be some.
Yeah, there will be some, and it's making sure. I think part of it is dealt with by the design approval process, which is to make sure those cambers that are created are suitable for the uses of that footway that it's crossing. So if it is a shared cycle lane on the footway, then we'll need to make sure that design approval process takes that into account and considers the cambers that are created. Yeah. And that's part of the reason for the change.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on. Next is the Capital Programme 21-22 Consolidated Report. This is Tony.
Yes, that's right, Councillor. So the report provides an update on the delivery of schemes in 2020-21 and recommends allocations for funding in 2021-22. It includes carryover funding from the previous year, and it also includes the allocation from grants such as the Active Travel Fund and funds for major projects such as the station frontage improvements and the dualling of the A1237. Details of these schemes will be brought forward in separate reports to the executive and executive member. And I think we should highlight, obviously there's been highlighted the issue about the delivery of the Active Travel Fund schemes. These are schemes we've been working on for some time now. We need to make sure that they are deliverable in terms of the layouts that we can accommodate on the street, but also recognise that a key element that the government have brought forward now, they've changed their approach really to move sort of away from an emergency active travel type approach towards one which recognises the importance of consultation which we need to undertake as part of that process, and to ensure that we have schemes which are deliverable and meet the standards where at all possible. That process takes a little longer than originally anticipated. We have also introduced, brought forward additional resources into the team to help delivery of those schemes, and they've only just started on the ground.
Yes, I appreciate that. Well, as you'll know, I'm as frustrated as other members of the public about trying to make progress, but obviously we have to work within the resources and the regulations that we have, and so I would very much want to see those projects moving forward as quickly as we can now, if we've got the staff in place to be able to deliver them. And those are sort of, as you say, those schemes are included within the overall list of funding allocation for the coming year. I'm sure that I think these reports will normally go through to the scrutiny as well. If there are issues that they want to raise or questions to ask, then that option is available to members of the parties as well. But I'm happy to approve the the detail of the capital programme that you've got set out here, acknowledging that, as you say, some of the programmes timescales have been challenging to deliver them, but hopefully we can now move forward quickly with those with the extra resource that we have available.
Okay.
Thank you. So the next item I've got is the STEP Smart Travel Evolution Programme Data Platform.
So, as you will remember, this was on the agenda for last month's session, and we withdrew this while we could just seek some further clarity.
So as you can imagine, a transport model in itself handles quite a lot of data in terms of looking at those, but a live model, which allows us to adjust traffic flows and adjust signals, etc., requires an even bigger data platform. So this report seeks to procure a data platform. DFT have confirmed this is in accordance with the grant they've given us for the live data platform, and the winning bid is contained within a confidential annex. So there's probably only you have got a copy of that in the room at the moment, but that confirms that it's within your gift to award that, or confirm you're happy to proceed on that basis.
Okay, and I note the sort of comments in here about it having gone to an open market tender process to procure and identify the preferred bidder for a 7-year contract. And just to reassure me that that is basically that they will establish the data platform and then maintain it for that period of time, and presumably provide us whatever services are in within the contract.
Yes, and DFT have confirmed they're happy that that ongoing maintenance for that 7 years is part of that grant fund.
Right, and this certainly sounds. I think it's already had some media coverage about the benefits this brings in terms of real-time reaction to situations on the network. I think with a compact city like York, it's inevitable that sort of a bus held up somewhere or a lorry broken down or whatever can impact quite widely across the network, and this will help our officers be able to react to that and adjust the signalling as appropriate. That's my understanding. I also welcome the fact that this potentially will give us a much better facility in terms of modelling potential impacts as part of our local transport plan review. So I don't know, what's the time scale for? I mean, obviously, once we take the decision, then what's the time scale for actually implementation?
The model is already there now. This is the platform that holds all the data. So, so we've already got the model in place, and that's starting to be used. But this is about, you know, each day that goes past, we can collect data of how traffic moves, and it builds. The model becomes more intelligent as a result of that.
Right. So it's going to be telling us which roads to take in future, is that?
Well, in future, you know, at the moment now, you can get quite coarse versions of this, for instance, on your mobile phone and some of the mapping applications, but they don't integrate with our traffic systems. And actually what this will allow us to do is to say, you know, this is the best route to use, or, you know, we're going to adjust the signals here because there's an incident here, and we can see that traffic flows are going to have to change as a result. So it allows us to do those things in a very sort of live and reactive way.
One of the things that's been raised with lots of people, I think Darren's had some dealings with trying to make sure that the sat navs have the right information. Is that going to help with that as well? Because obviously, as you say, links, it's a lot of real-time information about levels of congestion.
So all of that will help. As I say, you know, the platforms, the model is there now. The data platform will be in place by November. So yes, we'll start collecting that data by November.
Okay, well, I'm happy to approve this, and I hope it proves to be something which will benefit not just the current circumstances, but our sort of plans for the future of the transport in the city. Of plans for sustainable transport as well as motor traffic. So that concludes my agenda, unless anybody's got any other business. No? Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending. And apologies for the hiccups with the public speakers, but I think everyone had their say. Thank you.